So hopefully everyone can see that. Some thumbs up or nodding of heads would be good. Cool, great stuff. So describing woodland. So woodland by definition is half a hectare or more and more than 20 metres wide and containing mostly trees. And there's a number of different ways you can describe woodland. Probably the main starting point is these two here. Is it high forest or is it coppice? High forest being tall, mature canopy trees with a closed canopy, and coppice is characterised by lower growing shrubs, and if it's coppice with standards, they are under the taller trees. So those are the two main broad categories, and then you start getting into some of the detail further down this list here. Now, I should say at this point, don't worry about scribbling down loads of notes and trying to capture some of the information on these slides. We will be making them available afterwards. And I'm not going to go through the detailed points on every single slide. I want to touch on some of the key things, so don't worry too much about that. This is what I want to focus on today, what we really mean by ancient woodland and primary forest. So if we move on to management options, so woodland management options, again, quite a list of options here. Again, the fundamental question is, do you want to actively intervene or not? Do you want to leave your woodland to do its own thing, or to varying degrees, do you want to intervene? That's the starting point. So silviculture is the growing and management of trees by definition, and this list here is so starting at the top, quite heavy intervention, sort of management, clear felling of, you know, conifer plantations, that kind of thing. And then as you progress down the bottom of the list, we get a more soft approach to management, shall we say. It's not as intensive, and even right at the bottom, not doing anything at all. So there's that, and there's this as well. You might have heard this term, continuous cover forestry, sort of a move to diversify even age conifer plantations, that kind of thing, make them a bit more diverse in a number of different ways. Some people say that, you know, we can try and use this as a near natural form of management, and then you will have heard this buzzword rewilding, and, you know, what do we really mean by that, and where does it sit? So hopefully we're going to kind of delve into the detail behind some of these methods of woodland management in this session, and try and get back to a more fundamental question of whether we should act or not act in managing our woodland. Just a very quick hand-drawn slide I threw together yesterday about the kind of things you might need to consider when you think about how to manage your woodland. I mean, there's things here like, you know, what conditions are at your site, you know, what are the soils like, how wet is it? I think a really fundamental question, which often gets overlooked, is, you know, what is your skill set? What are your resources? How much time do you have? How much money do you have? What are your interests and hobbies and values? I mean, that's a key point behind what will motivate you to manage your woodland in a certain way. And there's a whole range of things here. There's, you know, if you've recently bought woodland and it's got a restrictive covenant in the property deeds, that might prevent you from doing certain things. And then you know, the overarching framework for woodland management is a document called the UK Forestry Standard, for example. But I want to get back to this question before we get, you know, before getting into any of that. So, do we need to actively manage our woodlands? And this is what I want to focus on today: is the history and development of our woodlands in time to the point where we are now. So I want to explore two myths that exist around woodlands, and what to my mind exist around woodlands. You know, do we still have untouched wildwood in Britain? So do we still have primary forest? Primary forest being, by definition, a woodland that is its ecological functions aren't significantly disturbed, and there's no visible disturbance from humans. We'll take you back to the last ice age, which started about 31,000 BC. Much of the UK became covered in ice, all the way down to sort of Gloucestershire and North Norfolk, and started penetrating into the Midlands. And that lasted until about 10,000 BC. And even prior to this time, there had been numerous ice ages, and early humans had been coming and going from Britain. This was the last ice age. And what happened at that time, probably its peak was about 22,000 BC. Humans then left. It was too cold. And on the very edge of that white area you can see there was like an Arctic sort of tundra. and basically an inhospitable place to be. And the archaeological evidence suggests humans then, modern humans, sort of retreated from Britain at that time. So the ice sheet starts to melt, it starts to retreat at about 10,000 BC, and modern humans, Homo sapiens, start to recolonize again. And from this point on, humans basically occupy Britain right until the present day. Trees obviously following behind, so we have what's called the northern boreal forest moves in on the very edge of the ice sheet as it's retreating and moves northwards, and then in behind deciduous woodland comes in and starts chasing that northwards. So eventually we get to the point where this diagram on the right here, we have primary forests established across much of the UK where it's possible to grow between sort of 10,000 BC and 4,500 BC. So I really want to touch upon two ages, Stone Age and Bronze Age. We should probably call those the wood ages because wood was used to an incredible degree in those ages, rather than stone and bronze for literally everything. This photo on the left is a Neolithic wooden plank and post track from the Avalon Marshes in the Somerset Levels. It's about 3,800 BC. That comprises a number of tree species. This is a replica, by the way, but that's what it would have looked like. A number of tree species, and the planks were actually cut as timber planks. The posts were well rounded. The people at the time really knew what they were doing. This is a wooden artifact, so it's a 2-metre high post with intricate carvings on it from a similar period found in mid-Wales. And demonstrates that this was specifically cut to a certain dimension. It was specifically engraved and to mark a very significant point in the landscape. And on the right here we have another type of trackway. This is basically a hazel wattle hurdle, which is the likes of which we make today. Again in the Somerset Levels, this is about 1,500 BC. And people have estimated that this is 2 kilometres, this track, and to make this alone would have taken something like 45,000 individual hazel rods from a hazel stool. That would have needed something like up to 34 hectares of managed woodland, so that's 4 or 5 hectares of woodland being actively managed as coppice on an 8-year cutting cycle. Now you imagine I'm a coppice worker and I know how hard it is to cut half a hectare of woodland in a season with the modern tools I have and get it all processed and stacked and all that kind of stuff. This is management at a landscape scale by many, many people. And don't forget, they didn't have chainsaws. They didn't have, the modern cutting implements we have today. So, modern humans, Homo sapiens, were sort of hunter-gatherers up until about 4,000 BC. Then there was a conversion from that to farming, and it was a progressive process that spread through the UK. And what we would call natural high forests, primary forests, was starting to be nibbled away at quite a degree that it had been previously, but not to the same scale. So it wasn't so much a slash and burn policy, archaeologists think, more of a sort of nibbling away and progressive taking. So you end up with what we call mixed coppice, or a sort of coppice with standards, where you have a number of trees that have been ring barked and they've died then because of that, and then different species are coming through. So it's a bit like a wood pasture sort of scenario, and it's really from 4,000 BC right through to 800 BC. So from the Stone Age right through to the Iron Age, that this is now spreading throughout the UK. So our woodlands are changing beyond any dimension that they have before, and it's never been the same since, essentially. It's quite striking, that change. We have sort of descendant remnants of those early pine woods that are now around Strathspey in Scotland, the northern boreal forest remnants. They're sort of descended from that period when the woodlands retreated north following the ice sheet. But even they've been heavily influenced by man to quite some degree. Some people estimate that the last primary forests in the UK, certainly in England, were reduced to 50% by by 500 BC, so during the Iron Age. So disappeared quite considerably by this point. And again, that picture there is just a reminder of the fact that, you know, primary forest covered the whole of the UK and it was composed of different dominant species. This area up here is pretty much now where the northern boreal forest kind of hangs on as remnants, these kind of fragments of Scots pine woodland. And this is where we are today with woodland. We are essentially at risk. So you may have seen this hockey stick graph before. So this is a stick of woodland decline in England from about 15% land cover. So the amount of land covered by woodland in England was 15% around the time of the Doomsday Book was produced, and it's been on a rapid decline until the 1900s, where it ended up being about 5%, the early 1900s. So by 5%, you know, 5% of land cover by then. When you consider that, you know, as we've just seen earlier, the whole of the UK was covered in primary forest, so a considerable decline. Celts, Romans, Saxons, Normans all required wood for fuel, smelting metal, making lime, construction of buildings as their populations grew. So obviously, you know, following on from Stone Age, Bronze Age and Iron Age people, that's what occurred. We just talked about that. So there's been an upsurge. Obviously, the Forestry Commission was formed with the intention of trying to hang on to the woodland that we did have left. It's now up to about 13% of land cover. It's about 3.1 million hectares of woodland across the UK. So, you know, we're getting there, but it's still obviously just below the Doomsday levels. So yeah, small. I mean, essentially, a lot of woodland is small. It's fragmented. It's unmanaged. 28% of woodland in Great Britain is below 28 hectares. They're little blobs in the landscape, and that's an even higher value in England, for example. And yeah, 56% of woodland in the UK is not managed to an independent standard of sustainability, the UK WAS scheme. So that is a concern. And there are numerous publications and pieces of research that show, you know, declining bird species, declining butterfly species, declining small mammals, all as a result of, you know, this continued, I would say, inappropriate management of woodlands. So on to the second myth. Woodland will be fine if we leave it alone. I want to kind of, you know, is that really true? Do we, you know, if we went from what was left bequeathed to us after the Ice Age, which is what is here on the right essentially, and try and get it back to some form of primary forest on the left, is that, you know, is that really achievable? How do we know if that's achievable? Well, to some degree, we're really fortunate in that a chap called George Peterkin has spent a long time studying a woodland in the lower Wye Valley, very near to where I live, called Lady Parkwood, which is 36 hectares of ancient woodland in the lower Wye Valley, and for the large part since 1944 has been managed without direct human intervention, and some parts have been left to go natural since 1870. So I think within Europe it's certainly one of the most important kind of woodlands that is being studied to look at this issue of just leaving woodland to do its own thing. It's a very interesting read. There's a lot of information in there. Essentially what happens, and you know, George will excuse me, I'm paraphrasing, incredible amount of work that's been done there, but there's more deadwood, there's a denser canopy, there's less light, fungi and snails do very well, certain types of invertebrates like deadwood do very well, certain woodpeckers do, birds like woodpeckers do very well, and certain species of bat do quite well. But and he's very frank about this in the book, that many plants and animals have actually gone or retreated significantly as a result of that, you know, leaving the woodland to do its own thing, and that includes the understory shrubs like hazel and that kind of thing have significantly retreated. Many butterfly species have gone. Many of the sort of ancient woodland indicator flowers have sort of retreated. A lot of bird species have gone, and some small mammals like dormice. So it's those plants and animals that are adapted to the light and structural variability that happens with the woodland that was left to us after the last ice age retreated. If you look at that picture on the right versus the picture on the left. The picture on the left is sort of where Lady Park Wood ultimately, will end up if it's left to continue, and the one on the right is the woodland that we were left with by the Stone Age and Bronze Age people. So another topic I want to touch upon in terms of myth number 2 is pests and diseases. So this is a picture of what we call a deer browsing line. So you can see that there's a very distinct area of brown below where it's green, and that is essentially been grazed clear by deer. Overpopulation of deer. You can see there's nothing regenerating through the woodland floor there. There's no woodland flowers, there's no tree seedlings coming up, and then the lower parts of what trees have managed to get away has been grazed clear. Deer populations have exploded in the last 200 years. A moderate amount of browsing is definitely helpful for certain woodlands and for certain types of animals, but the levels we have now basically is stopping any natural regeneration of tree seedlings. It's certain species like muntjac heavily grazing our ancient woodland indicator flowers, and many birds and butterflies, and the studies that show this are declining as a result of that. We've also got problems with grey squirrel. Grey squirrel preferentially attacks the bark of the dominant species of deciduous woodland trees, the trunks and the large branches. Typically, species that are 10 to 40 years old, and obviously, if you think about that, that's then stopping trees that did manage to get away from deer. That's then stopping them going to become mature canopy trees. So between deer and grey squirrel combined, we're getting no trees coming through from young. We're having no trees then going on to become canopy trees, and that is a huge problem for our ancient woodlands. We then have, I think around at last count, 44 different pests and diseases that have either entered this country, entered the UK and Britain, or are already here and are causing havoc with tree species. This picture on the right is what ash dieback looks like in mature trees, and that's in July, August, when the canopy should be full of leaves, and you can see it's looking very spindly and a bit like lion's tails at the end of the branches, and in 3 years that has gone from being something that people in the forestry industry knew about, not many people did, to now it's everywhere. In the lifetime I've been coppicing at a local site, it was like 1 in 9 ash trees had it, and now it's the other way around. It's 9 in 10 have it in 2 years, and that is pretty much present across the whole of the UK. So existing trees are being killed. So between these 3 things combined, our woodlands are potentially in a really grave state. And timber. You may be surprised to know that the UK is the 2nd largest importer of timber next to China. Quite a staggering statistic, really, when you think about it. Woodland, wood is a renewable source for energy, as well as woodlands capturing carbon when they grow and putting it into the soil and into the trees themselves. Wood biomass, so products made of wood, can have a huge role to play in tackling the climate crisis, by making sure that carbon is then locked up into the products that we buy and make things with. If we use more timber in the construction industry, for example, that's less energy intensive manufacturing that needs to go on for concrete and steel in those structures. So, this has been the focus of a key report 2 years ago from the Committee on Climate Change, Biomass in a Low Carbon Economy, and it touches upon that very fact. And that was influenced by some very important research done in the UK on timber in the housing, building, construction industry. And CONFOR, the Confederation of Foresters, recently on the Eskdalemuir estate in Scotland, did a very, very interesting study around trying to measure how much carbon a managed productive woodland captures, but also how much it locks up into the products that then get made. And they estimate something like 1 hectare of productive forest, so plantation forest being managed with timber, can basically provide, or is equivalent to the carbon emissions from 1 person for a whole year. So, and most of that is not from the trees capturing the carbon. That's actually in what's called the displacement effect, whereby, you know, you lock it up in the wood and the wood then stays there and isn't burnt. It's within structures that remain. And I'd also like to say that obviously coppice has a part to play in this as well. You know, restoring coppice at scale across the UK could also play a key role in tackling the climate crisis. The markets are sort of buoyant locally. Coppice, there could be more restoration of coppice, but, you know, the sector is very adaptable and innovative. It makes a whole range of products. You know, we've really got to try and tap into contemporary coppice products so that we can, instead of just having timber from plantation forests, you know, we can look at using coppice products as well. So from the sort of coppice side of things as well, I think that's really important. And there's been some studies done on the range of coppice products that could kickstart that sort of interest as well. And there we go. That's just the final picture on, you know, if we used more coppice products for furniture for our, you know, gardens, our gazebos, indoors, you know, that would be a great place to start as well. So that was a very, very quick canter through woodlands, woodland management, and you know, the fundamental question of should we be managing our woodlands actively or not. So to recap. The British landscape has already had thousands of years of human intervention. Our woodlands are small, fragmented, at risk, and no longer what we call primary forest. In general, and this is a general statement, because there are huge variations in our woodlands generally across the board. But, you know, when you look at the most of the woodland we have in the UK, which in England, for example, is deciduous woodland, and I guess across the UK makes up most of our woodland. Most plants and animals are adapted to varying degrees of light and having that variability in structure, and they don't cope very well with the sort of like dense primary forest closed canopy situation. Don't get me wrong; those woodlands are important. We do need a range of woodlands, but in general terms, most of our plants and animals are adapted to those kind of light conditions. I think this is the biggest reason why we should actively manage our woodlands, and that is my personal view, and one I know colleagues in small share, but I really encourage you to kind of revisit this fundamental question of do we actively intervene or not. I think we've got a moral obligation to tackle the huge problems that are facing our woodland at the moment, which is overpopulations of deer browsing away the regenerating saplings, you know, the grey squirrel damaging the bark, which eventually kills the trees we do have. We've got many pests attacking our trees, being they insects or fungi or bacteria, and you know, we have a human-made crisis, the climate crisis. Now, you know, trees are a significant part of the solution. They're not the only solution. I will be frank about that. But you know, this country should not be the second largest importer of timber in the world. I think that is frankly disgraceful, and we need to do more to tackle that problem. And yeah, if we actively intervene in our woodlands, and you know, I'm certainly not advocating going in there and clear felling everything. It's a more subtle style, a more kind of low intensity style of management. But we create that variability, and we need variability to tackle climate change, rather than having huge areas that are even aged, all the same age, and not having structural variability. So intervening with woodlands in a kind of controlled and low intensity kind of way makes the woodlands more resilient. We can give that age diversity back. We can structure the woodlands physically, and you know, we can let the light in. There are many other reasons. There's a lot of changes coming through grant schemes and environmental legislation, like the Agriculture Bill, the Environment Bill, that kind of thing, changes to countryside stewardship through the new Environmental Land Management Scheme. And they are all very much geared towards delivering the three pillars benefits, as it were, the sustainable benefits to environment, to society, to us all, in terms of trying to get more ecosystem benefits from woodlands, those ecosystem services like clean air and flooding protection. And I think that's great, but I would rather than look at it as a let's try and squeeze the woodlands for as much as we can get out of them for our own benefit. You know, let's look at this more fundamental, I think, obligation, where we have a moral obligation to try and make the best of the woodland fragments that we do have. Thank you for listening. That's kind of it in a nutshell. I've compiled a list of some reference sources that I've used to compile this presentation and have helped me on the way to kind of my journey of understanding woodland management in my career, and some more recent things as well. So yeah, you know, do be curious, do go away, do have a look at those.